And we're live, just as a truck goes past my window. Hello, world. And if anyone's watching along, thanks for getting up at 4 a.m. if you're in the States. I am joined by the almighty Sam Gregory. Now, we know each other because we actually did a Webflow podcast episode together. So you may well already know quite a lot about him. He's the founder of Jupiter and Giraffe, a company that delivers world-class immersive website experiences for businesses in the XR, AR, VR, Metaverse, Web3, digital interactive, and live experience space. What a mouthful that is. He also does loads and loads of other stuff. You may have seen him on YouTube. You may have heard a podcast that he was on with me, as well as many other people. He is very well known in the, I'd say, low code space. No code, low code. We'll talk a little bit about this today, but I feel like, you are very much more than just someone in the no code space. Is that fair? Is that a fair?
I think so. I've been making websites for an awful long time, so I bring that like coding knowledge, understanding the web, understanding browsers, and I just bring that into mostly the Webflow sphere, but I divulge every now and again into other no-code tools.
And also, he's doing a bit of travel vlogging. You're very interested in different medias. I feel like that's why we get on, because we're interested in random different bits of not just Webflow, but just online stuff. So it's great to have you on the stream. And the reason partly why you're on the stream this morning is because you made a video about Slater. Now, this was in the Slater Slack, and everyone was like, "Ooh, interesting that he's commenting on this UI experience thing. He's commenting on things not being quite right." There's a little bit of teasing out of Slater as users start to use it more and test it more. And then I messaged you because there's this new experience that we've just launched, and you've been having a play this week, and we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of that. Before we talk about that, though, you brought up a really important point, which is we should first start off by just saying, what is Slater? Why did it start? And for anyone that's kind of hearing about Slater but not really knowing what it is, should we start there? Is that a good place to start, do you reckon?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant start. Do you want to take the reins on this one, or shall I?
I'll start, and then I think you will have a lot more to say. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's all good.
Okay, cool. So I am going to quickly share my screen and show you guys the genesis of Slater. So Edgar Allan, the agency that I work for, and the agency that you probably all know and love, because they are very community orientated in the Webflow space. They had this project called Letter Run. Now, Letter Run was kind of a moonshot of a project. It was not a client project. It was a project that basically Edgar Allan wanted to test the limits of Webflow. And to do so, they needed to use quite a lot of custom code, which proved to be a bit of a nightmare with the Webflow code editor, just because, obviously Webflow isn't specifically designed for code. The point is that the code is abstracted. And this is essentially a game that was made on Webflow, but using a lot of other tools, including VS Code, GitHub, etc. And what happened was the guys at Edgar Allan, wanted to essentially do code a lot easier with Webflow projects. The other cool thing about it is that not everyone at Edgar Allan is actually a coder themselves, right? So Jared, the head of dev, was getting all these questions about code, and as ChatGPT was coming in, and AI was becoming more and more prominent and just a lot better as more and more people used it, Jared basically realized he could clone himself, and that people could actually ask simple coding questions to AI, and that the answer could be, even better than he could give, and a lot quicker, obviously. And so Slater kind of was born out of that. And very quickly, I think Mason realized that, wow, this tool actually has a lot of impact for the wider Webflow community. So what's really powerful about Slater is that it's specifically designed for Webflow, which is something that I don't think necessarily people realize as clearly as they should, which is probably on me as someone that's doing the marketing. But Slater was designed by the leading Webflow agency, or one of the leading Webflow agencies, specifically to do custom code in Webflow projects, which means that it's super easy to set up and to link with your Webflow projects, and that you can also have the customizability to deploy code to a single page or multiple pages or globally across the site. And they've worked closely with the Webflow team to actually make this app work really well for the Webflow platform. So it's a tool that can be used solo or within a team, and it's a tool that is specifically designed for Webflowers, and it's meant to be effortless and painless to generate and manage custom code across that platform. What is your take on that? Does that help clear up questions? If anyone has any questions as we go, but Samuel,
can I see the chat? Is that in StreamYard as well, or do I have to be on on YouTube to see the comments? Because that'd be great.
So on the right panel, you should have. Well, I've got comments on the top right. Do you see that? Can you click that?
Click join the. So I'm going to click join so I can see the comments, because that would be helpful. Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, that he was getting, who was it that was getting coding questions and just wanted to...
Jared.
Jared. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course, the coding experience is really simple inside of Webflow. You don't get validation. They barely do much cleanup with it. It's the workflow, and we'll get into this a bit later on, the workflow of actually having to publish your code and see your changes, and then if something's broken, you've got to then go back into work. That for me was the big kind of like great feature from a few other solutions, but also Slater was great for that, and the automatic differentiation between development and production was really good too. So yeah, it was good little rundown there. I've joined the chat now.
Good. I think there's so many different features, and hey, Webflow Encode is in the building. Well, pretty obviously in the building. We haven't necessarily touched upon there, and I'm sure we'll dig into those as we go along with this stream. But just from a very high level overview, I think it's important that you can not only generate code using the AI, but also manage the code. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of using Slater is that there's plenty of AI coding tools out there, and I'm not going to pretend that Slater has got like better AI than anyone else. Like, it's using ChatGPT 4. So there are people who've messaged me to say, Jack, why don't I just use ChatGPT 4, right? Why don't I just ask the questions from there, get the code from there, and then just paste it straight into my Webflow project? Now, fair question. And frankly, you can do that. So I'm not saying you have to use Slater if you want to do custom code in your Webflow projects. The big problem with doing that, though, is twofold. One is that Webflow has 10,000 character limit. So if you're doing a lot of code on a particular page, you won't actually be able to host that code there if it's more than 10,000 characters. The other problem with it is that if you're doing custom code on multiple different pages, it can be a bit of a nightmare in Webflow. The code editor tests the code without hitting save, publish on every page. You don't actually know why the code is problematic. And the other problem is that you've got to navigate through the different pages unless you do it outside of the designer. It's just all a little bit like of a faff. And the difference between that and Slater is that there's no 10,000 character limit. You can obviously navigate between folders and files very simply. You can deploy code globally or to various different pages or to a single page, and you can debug super quickly using the debug feature. So it's not to say that you can't do code anywhere else. There are plenty of code tools out there. There's plenty of AI alternatives out there. That's not the selling point with Slater. The selling point is the management ability of custom code, not just to one workflow project, but to multiple. And if you're in a team particularly, it's insanely powerful because there might be 5 different people working on different workflow projects at the same time within the same team account. So I think maybe what we should do is ask you, Samuel, how you're using Slater, and maybe we can share the screen and kind of visualize some of the stuff that we're talking about. Does that sound good?
Sounds great. Yeah. I can't show any code, unfortunately, because I'm working on some pretty top secret projects. But I can certainly describe to everyone how I'm using it. And just to touch on that AI thing, of course, you can go to ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot and ask it to write you a bunch of code. But really, the Slater's implementation of ChatGPT is to help you learn how to code, not to help you write code. Is to help you understand bits of code. There's a great feature where you can select a bit of code and describe what that does. There's also just the open chat where you can say, how do I do X, Y, and Z? And whilst that's great, it needs to be known that there's 2 aspects to it. One, it may get that wrong. So there's elements that you need to be able to somewhat be able to determine what is messed up or what's incorrect. That's not specific to Slater. That's just AI in general. And so you need to be sort of clued up on, and that's why you can't ask AI just to create Pong, the app, or create a website to do this, that, and the other. You need to build it in small chunks, get it to write code in small little chunks that you can understand, and that is less likely to go wrong. The dream obviously would be just to get you to write a website, but so Slater's implementation is more, I call it more of a coach. It's more of a coach than actually a assistant or an assistant to write your code for you. But that being said, I don't tend to use the AI coach as much as someone who's advanced, quote unquote advanced kind of JavaScript user. I don't tend to use the coach at all. As you saw in my video, I actually used the coach to figure out the capabilities of Slater, because I was still learning it. It was pretty much live when I made that video. I didn't know how to use Slater, and I was figuring out like, how do I import files? And I thought there might be nuances that are specific to Slater. So when I asked it a question, I wanted to know how to import a file. I thought there might be a weird way of doing it inside Slater, but it gave me a plain simple JavaScript solution to import files into another thing. That's actually not a feature in Slater, and it doesn't need to be, but or can it? I don't know. I'll leave that to the guys to figure out. But yeah, that's how I was using. That's to the extent I use the coach, because I'm not trying to know code. I know code kind of already. So if you are learning, great feature, but that's not how I'm using it. I tend to use it purely from an organizational standpoint, where I want to one, bypass the 10,000 code limit that Webflow has, have a greater coding experience that I wouldn't get through the code editor on Webflow, and also a simplified deployment process where, and I love this about Slater, as I said earlier, the differentiation between development and production, and how easy it is for me to save to development, and how difficult it is to deploy to production. And what I mean by that, it's not, and I thought this is a weird nerdy thing that I thought about, but it was very clever. I would have expected to deploy to production, you'd go Command or Control Shift S as a more advanced, but actually Command 3. So like that deployment to production is slightly more tricky, so you don't accidentally do it, because that could be a danger zone. And maybe a bit of feedback, it would be, are you sure you want to deploy to production? I'd love to see that, because we sort of, I feel like as a community, we need to treat production code a bit more seriously. It's too simple right now for me as a community in Slater, in Webflow. Just we need to really treat production with, like, is everyone clear on what's going live right now? A bit more of a process. And I think Webflow are addressing that with branches and all the rest of it, but that's beside the point. It'd be great if I get a confirmation message to board to production. But either way, that whole process was super simplified for me with regards to deploying custom code. So that's what gravitated me towards Slater, and why I was like, oh, this is like, as I said, the missing custom code solution, or I think it's the title of this YouTube, definitely the missing custom code solution. And as you rightly said, there are alternatives, and I think we should talk about that later on, but that's how I'm using it, and I hope that answered the question for you.
Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful. And I think this, staging versus production, I think is something that, particularly with clients, it's quite awkward when they make changes and they don't know if it's something's necessarily, because there's drafts, stage production, or ready to be actually published, and I've had questions about that recently. A little bit confusing, like how to actually get stuff live. But then from a code perspective, there's an extra element there, which is like, the client wants something, and normally you'd have to go into the actual client project and edit the code in there. Whereas with Slater, that's another thing that's quite important to say, is that after you've transferred that code to the client, you can still access that code, without having to go into Webflow. And I'm not sure if you've done that yet, but that's quite an important thing to say as well. There's currently been 50 transfers from paying users. So that's something that what we need to do as a Slater team is to actually create documentation for clients to understand Slater, as well as users of Slater, i.e. people like you, Sam, to understand, I can actually edit my client's code. Here's what's going to happen when I transfer the code. Here's the safety of that code, and here's where it's being hosted. So anyway, that's a whole other path we could go down. But does anyone have any questions? I feel like we're saying a lot of stuff that if anyone's watching and is really interested in this stuff, you've probably got questions to ask, so feel free to ask them. At the new Slater experience together, I know we can't look at custom code from your site, but I think it'd be quite useful to explain that, to have a little look at Slater itself, and also there's been some big feature updates that have just been launched, and that's only for paid users right now. But that's very soon going to be rolled out for everybody. So I think it would be good to give everyone a bit of a preview of that. Are you up for?
Yeah.
Are you up for sharing your screen and having a look at that together?
Yeah, Yeah, let's do that.
Awesome.
Yeah, like I say, I can't go into the actual implementation of this code, but yeah.
No problem. Yeah, completely appreciate that. That is, yeah, client code should not be live streamed. If anyone's thinking about doing that, don't do it. Okay, so we have got the first question. I feel like we've kind of answered that. What are you using custom code for? Why use Slater now? I feel like editor itself, you'll get a better.
I think that's Jack. Disconnected my end. My solo right now because I can talk you through the new experience. Actually, let's go back to the legacy experience and I can show you the new experience. So this is the old experience here. And maybe I can go into my test project. This is actually the project I demonstrated on my video that I made. And you've got your chat here on the right. Obviously, your main coding area, and this is the chat with the AI. This is the main coding area. You've got all your files here and kind of all your options and whatever it is. The new experience isn't a huge departure from the old experience. There's more visibility here with regards to some of this stuff. From a critical standpoint, I would argue that maybe some of this stuff, it isn't really, I mean, I don't necessarily care what my member ID is or how many projects I transport. As soon as I log into Slater, this information isn't top of mind for me right now. My projects really are top of mind. But regardless, it's still good to see a refresh. Oh, Jack, you've joined the party again. I had to take it solo there for a second.
Dude, you're a pro of the game. I was like, if there's anyone I'm gonna lose internet with, it's you, because I knew you could handle it. But sorry about that. I'm back. Carry on.
Great. So the new experience is, I think from a visual standpoint, is a bit more cleaner, a bit more breathable, but you still got the main chat area on the right here. You still got the main code section here on the left, in the center, sorry. And you can choose then to sort of focus modes, I would say. Once again, some feedback here. It's kind of odd that there's 2 clicks to show code only. This is the view that I often spend my time in most of the time, but I did quite like the old experience. Maybe a little toggle on the right here that you could just show and hide the chat. To hide it under 2 clicks is a bit whatever. But anyway, and then you've got the breakdown on all the files here. They've been condensed, your files, because you can create CSS files as well, which is nice. And that's all kind of visible on the right here, which is really, really nice. And I think everything's just been simplified a little bit. Got my libraries here, connections. I believe this is the connection with Webflow has been brought more to the surface a little bit. It was always, I don't think it's changed. I just think it's more visible that you're connected to Webflow, like you've got connect to Webflow button. I don't think I've even done that yet. So code settings and things like this. But yeah, a bit more of a refined experience. That's
this is an important thing to say, is that you've essentially got in the top right awesome. Sorry, I think there's a little lag, so my bad if I spoke over you there. In the top right, there's the connection center on the left. panel there. So essentially, we're trying to make it as easy as possible for you to connect to your project. Now, once you hit the Connect to Webflow button, you'll basically connect to whatever project within Webflow. So it will open in a new tab, and you can choose which project that you want to connect that code to, or multiple projects, and then you can essentially choose which pages you want to connect that code to from there. If you watch the Corey Moyne live stream, he actually triggers the code on functions, so on click functions and things like that. So it's not necessarily that each page that you create is linked to a page in Webflow or multiple pages. You can actually have that code there, but have that code in Slater, but then that code is going to get all the function is going to be triggered by whatever you do in Webflow. So
that's interesting. So if I understand that correctly, he's utilizing the fact that the code he writes inside of Slater exists on the global scope, and then he's triggering that within Webflow. So he's triggering those functions. Oh, interesting. I'm more in the camp of like, to go into how I'm using it. I've got a global file here, which is stuff that appears on multiple pages. I'm trying to keep comments and all the rest of it, to help me out a little bit. But then I have these per page files. And then I do think I have a helper function, I think. Here we go, number format. So I utilize these functions here. And as you can see, where is it? I think it's in global. That's from when I was using an existing method, which we can talk about in a bit. But yeah, I'm using the number format function. So I kind of break my files up into those individual pages. I kind of don't want to be jumping to and from Webflow, just from a separation of concerns aspect. So whatever works for that guy, then all for it. But this is kind of how I'm using it. But yeah, I mean, that's and it's interesting. And we could talk about the features that I'm interested to have. And these two struck me, actually. I don't know are you allowed to talk about these at all? You've got documentation here coming soon. You've got variables coming here soon. Are you allowed to divulge in some of that stuff?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. To be honest, I'm not sure, but I'm going to say it anyway. So what's happening, which is quite an important thing, is that we've got let's change the layout, make us both big. We've got a community library coming. Now, the community library is quite an important feature. Imagine a kind of Wikipedia of all these different Webflows that are adding custom code to the library. And what that will mean is that you've got code that works because Webflows are adding that, and they can do that through documentation. Now, what we want to do is to really give credit to people that are maybe giving more information than just a video explaining, what actually happens when you do it, things like that. So that's what the documentation file is about. Like, if you not only add a snippet but give a bit of extra information, then we've talked about upvoting and downvoting in the community library. So, whoever's added the most code snippets will go up the charts. And we've got that link to a community program called the Slater Advocates Program. And the idea with that is that essentially anyone that, adds loads and loads of code snippets and helps the community out is hopefully going to be rewarded with Slater merch and other things that we've talked about. So that's what documentation is. Essentially, it's adding to the community library. Now, right now, you've got a personal library within Slater. What that means is, any code that you create, you can save to your library, which you can access whenever you open a new project. So if there's a bit of code that you normally use, obviously from your personal library, you can add that. But that's cool. But what if that was more open source and you could decide whether you wanted, code that you've saved to be, used wider? And there's so many webflows out there that have got Notion docs, Coda docs. Even I've seen someone with a Word doc that they've got loads of code that could be used a lot wider. So that's what documentation is about. Any questions about documentation from you or anyone who is in the chat?
Well, on that, I actually, because one of my thoughts was, and there's this, I don't know how familiar you are with this, Jack, but there's a tool called JSDoc, and that takes in the form of comments where above a function or above a class or whatever, you write a comment in a specific kind of way, and the JSDoc will run through all your code and generate documentation formatted in such a way where you've got code snippet, you've got whatever, and it's more from an internal team perspective. So when I saw documentation, I had no idea that was to do with the social thing, and it's an interesting thing because, like you say, you've spoken to people who have Word documents of code snippets, and that's solving that problem, which is great. Whereas one of my pieces of feedback or something I think bigger teams might appreciate is, again, documentation of the code. What's it trying to do? What should you pass it, and all the rest of it. And TypeScript is another discussion about all this, where TypeScript makes it harder and easier to really mess up your code, but it's certainly something that's becoming popular now in the code thing. That's all I was going to say about the documentation. Is we'd love to see a bit of JSDoc implementation.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a huge AI potential for this. If you write code, or if you have some code that you constantly use, do you need to write what that code is used for when you've literally got an explain code button within Slater? So there's things that we can really leverage AI to do. But one huge thing is the kind of human to human aspect of the Webflow community, which I think is fascinating. I've never seen a tool where people know there's kind of like local famous people, i.e. like, people on Twitter know each other. I've stayed at people's houses from being friends on Twitter with people in the Webflow community. I mean, that is how Webflow brought people together in a way that's so bigger than just the tool itself. And what we want is that real personability, that as much as you can throw a human aspect that we really want to bring in to Slater as a tool, and celebrate the people that are using Slater, contributing to the snippets, and recognizing the human behind the effort that they're putting in. So yeah, completely hear you. There are plenty of tools that we can leverage, and plenty of similar kind of code snippet libraries. I mean, that's not an original idea, but hopefully what is original is how we are the community within the product itself.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not a massive, I just, maybe I'm silly and I don't utilize the community as much as I should, but oftentimes I'm so just jump in and just do it rather than spend the time thinking if a solution is already out there. Sometimes it is, sometimes I do, but oftentimes I'm too short-sighted in that respect. So I think leveraging the community is especially if you're learning particularly, and a lot of people are learning web development for the first time. I'm a veteran in web development, so a lot of this stuff is already known to me. I've just got to either Google it real quick or find it up in the old noggin there, so yeah, the community aspect is really interesting.
Yeah, that's fair.
Respect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's worth saying that there's different people within communities, just like there's different humans like in the world, right? There's extroverts, introverts, the people that just want to get on and make the stuff and they don't really want to talk to anyone about it. And if they can just look at a web page, that's far more, they don't really care who's given them whatever it is. They're just like, hey, I just want to actually do the thing that I'm trying to do. Whereas there is other people that enjoy learning together, that enjoy the idea of being part of a tribe, and knowing, you know, other people that are doing the same things as them. And I think in this virtual environment, it's kind of hard to, like, you kind of need to give people that opportunity by letting them show themselves, as it were, by letting them kind of leaderboard or whatever. Would be like, hey, here are the humans that are contributing that code. And it's not like you need to necessarily be someone that's like, it's not like we want to create a cult, all right? Just to be clear for anyone that's watching, it's like, whoa, this is going a bit far, Jack. But it's just creating an environment where people can, hopefully learn together, grow together. And Mason always uses this phrase that a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that's the type of mentality that we're trying to bring into Slater, where it's like, we want people to, you know, help generously. And, you know, there are veterans like you in the space. There are people who maybe aren't as sufficient, you know, at coding, but are really ambitious, like Isabel Edwards. And just trying to gather a group of people that are all trying to, get risen by that rising tide together, I guess.
Yeah, like I say, it's something I don't leverage and I haven't really thought about in terms of, because it's not really implemented yet from what I've seen. So it's not something I saw. What did I see? I saw something in the tool that was something to do with community. Oh, it was literally the snippets. It was the sharing of the snippets. Do you want to make this available to the community? And that's as much as I've seen in terms of the community aspect. So I can't really comment too much on it, but it sounds interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's essentially, and that is for people that are essentially, we can give them a kickback if they make content around Slater, and then they can put an affiliate code and a little bit of money there. To say thanks for anyone that's creating that content. And then we've also talked about you know, celebrating people that give code snippets, and you know, maybe not just from a kind of a real perspective of giving them money, but also there's a kind of status aspect where we can say, look, we want to highlight you as someone that is really contributing to the community and should be recognized more generally. So exciting things coming. I know that people are like, cool, Jack, stop talking about this and get on and do it. Fair point, it's coming. We've talked about it for a little while, but there's been a lot of updates from kind of quite basic stuff, improving the UI, making sure that there's a dashboard so that you can easily filter your projects, etc. And then, you know, now we're getting on documentation, variable, and the community library will be obviously far easier once we've got documentation in place and people can actually add stuff. And then we can celebrate people adding stuff. But we need variables is a big piece of this. So documentation is for code snippet. And obviously variables, you've got variables update in Webflow itself, where you can change things, typography, etc. And Mason, Whit, Jared, the guys that are very, very involved in the technical feature updates, they're discussing, you know, how best would be to do variable changes across the site, or across multiple sites from Slater, and how best to do that. But it's exciting that, you know, Webflow have obviously got variables, and how can we make sure that you're able to make changes, you know, site-wide within Slater itself, or, you know, client projects or your own projects that are connected to Slater. It's quite exciting, hopefully.
Interesting. So it's more, because again, one thing specifically I was working on yesterday is I wanted a place to store all of my breakpoints, because I'm using some GSAP code which only runs certain animations on certain breakpoints. So I've stored those breakpoints that Webflow holds on its, they're just numbers basically. And I thought, I've got my object, and I guess I could put that in the library. But also, is that then a variable that I would love to access on multiple different pages? So I actually thought it was more to do with that. But what you were saying is more of a synchronization between the new Webflow variables feature than actually some global variables accessible within your Slater project.
Saying, I mean, how can we make variables actually useful? And there's kind of reinventing the wheel scenario that could play out, which actually isn't particularly helpful, which is like, well, you've already got a really solid variable system within Webflow. And obviously that code might be being deployed to single pages, and you might just want that variable to run on that particular page or whatever. But is variables that much of an add-on to the products that even makes it worth going to the effort of doing that? Or are there other areas that we could really double down on that are actually more powerful to do? And the variables conversation, like what actions are we taking in Slater that are actually going to change the front end of the website, and is that worth doing, is kind of being discussed. But maybe Samuel, we should have you more involved in that conversation. Like, how are real users doing that? Maybe variables should be focused more on the libraries that you're already running within Slater, and that Slater can communicate. I'm using GSAP code snippet, and I want every single I want that to be responsive, or this to go, whatever, I don't know. But how can you actually make sure that that's really useful? But yes, conversation to carry on with and be discussed, I feel. Lecky Karanwi, beautiful name, and I've probably butchered it, so I'm really sorry. He's asking loads of good questions. To be honest, right now I'm using it to do on page effects and run libraries like GSAP. It was awful doing that without a proper IDE, so can't wait to when people can share snippets or projects. Bingo. Very glad, Lecky. We will get the community up and running. I'm going to DM Jared right now and say, look, Lecky has spoken. We need this to come together ASAP. Rocky. So thank you for commenting that. That is great.
He asked about SAS as well.
3 tabs into 1 for me. Where's that question? SAS. Sorry, I'm a newbie, but wondering if you do CSS extensions like SAS.
It's a really good idea. Really, really good idea.
Do you want to speak on it?
Well, for those who don't know about SAS, I mean, CSS, what can I show you? Targeting an element, especially a very specific element on a page, you use classes or whatever, IDs or however inside of CSS. And CSS is written in a way where you have to write selector, selector, selector. You have to go deep, 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 deep. And your CSS becomes very bloated. Whereas SAS allows you to, let's say, for example, you've got a case studies component. You open that one selector, and then you nest within that. I mean, it does a whole bunch of other things as well, but this is where it shines. You nest then selectors inside of those curly brackets, and then SAS compiles that and outputs CSS. It's a very simple process, but it's just it cleans up your code, makes it more readable. It's kind of where variables began before CSS properties existed. You had this idea of reusable variables. There's so much stuff. Honestly, that's probably the best suggestion I've heard for Slater. That's a really good suggestion.
Banging. Wow.
Yeah.
That's big praise. But yeah, maybe that is something to consider instead of I mean, I guess that is variable seems to come out of that. So sounds like a lot of overlap there. But this idea of having extensions is quite interesting. Because obviously you could utilize extensions that already exist and use that on your CSS files within Slater. It's an interesting. This brings up a really important point though, and I know that we've only got 2 people watching, and they may well drop off as we talk about this. But who is Slater for, and what features do you build on top of that important question? Are you trying to create a tool that is essentially VS Code? Because we've now got JavaScript, we've got CSS. There's talk about extensions here, and it's kind of like the more complex you make a tool, the more advanced you need to be able to actually use that and fully get the benefits of it. And we've got Webflowers generally are not custom coders. I mean, that's why they're using Webflow a lot of the time. They're coming into the Webflow space without having a background in custom code a lot of the time, which isn't a good thing or a bad thing, but it does mean that when you're pushing the boundaries of Webflow as a platform, and you need to use custom code, or you want to use custom code, like GSAP libraries is a classic example of the first thing that people would use, or sliders, or whatever. That use case, we've gone from Slater to being a tool that can really help with that type of a use case very, very quickly, and it still can, but it's kind of like the more buttons you add, the more features you add, the more kind of complex additional things you add. It can be that you've actually made a tool that had a very powerful, simple benefit to one that is quite bloated, convoluted, and a lot harder to use than maybe the vast majority of users need it to be for. So plenty of people like you, Lecky, that have said, why don't you add this? Why don't you add this? Why don't you add this? And suddenly you've got a tool that can be quite difficult to manage, difficult to use, and actually, it's like we've made a Facebook for code type thing. It's like all these features, and it's like whoa. So just important to consider that.
Yeah, I think a lot of my suggestions or a lot of my thoughts revolve around bringing some VS Code. Actually, let me start with this. The beauty of Slater is that it puts itself in the middle between VS Code, which is buttons and switches and all this crazy stuff, and the Webflow interface, right? So it sits in between. So you guys are really a good point to really think about that user experience and only bring on what you deem necessary, or create a beautiful interface that allows you to abstract a lot of that, but people who want to dig a little bit more can. For instance, one of my suggestions is to have, I know you've got some basic styling where you can set font size and all the rest of it, but inside of VS Code, you can create what they call an editor config file. And that allows you to set the number of tabs, that allows you to set color, whatever. There's a lot you can do with it. What if I, as a Slater Advanced user, I'm doing a lot of air quotes at the moment. What if I, as a Slater Advanced user, created through a editor config file in there, and then Slater would understand that. So, to your point, how much do you give it? Because I want a few more VS Code features in there. I don't want them all. I think it could become scary and detract a lot of Webflow newbies because they just whatever. But at the same time, Webflowers who do write code, they don't know what they're missing when you've got syntax highlighting, or where you can see where your closing bracket is, or correct alignment as well is huge. I've seen code where it's just all over the place. when you can clearly see how it's, sorry, my camera's there. When you can clearly see where your code is indented and stuff like that, it makes it so much more clearer. And Slater's in a good position where they can introduce Webflowers to that aspect of coding that they just never realized even existed. What 2 spaces instead of 4 spaces means to your readability of your code, stuff like that. What's the maximum line length? You know, enabling that or introducing them to that through clever UX is will be just interesting to see.
Great point, and very, very well made. Are you in that user experience, or are you adding completely separate things that maybe aren't necessarily aiding the user? And in the context of what use cases are Webflow is actually using Slater for, and kind of building off that, because I think we can look at other tools and be like, oh yeah, let's use that, but unless that type of thing is actually being requested by Webflows or Webflows can truly benefit from, maybe it's not the best thing to do. But this is an important discussion. How do you add features, or what should the product roadmap be depending on feature requests? Are the feature requests coming from the user group that you actually want to attract, and how and there's kind of all sorts of different things that are milling around. But very good points there, Samuel. Appreciate that. I think we're going to need to have another conversation off a live stream with Jared and Mason and Whit, because I think you've got tons of really useful, powerful ideas for the product. Like you said, 2 people watch, but the video lasts forever.
That's very true.
I'm going to get that on my picture.
That's very true. There you go.
Sorry, I cut you off there. I think the lag cut you off, maybe.
No worries. I think we can have a conversation for sure, but remember, I'm one user of, I don't, you've spoken about community. I'm not using the community, so I'm one of your users, which I'm happy to divulge all this information on. But yeah, understanding what different types of users use the app for, and finding where the common ground is between us all is really important. I would say I'm going to be more developer heavy, professional. I hate calling myself professional, but like more code oriented user, which might not be the biggest users of Slater. Might be more learners, the low code to no code.
What's interesting though, I would say though that the interesting thing about Slater that we've noticed is that the people that get the most benefit, or at least people that are using Slater consistently, are paying users as well. They are behavioral client projects, and the ones that need functionality, that potentially Slater is getting to a stage where it's like, okay, we're turning more into a more comprehensive, coding product, and utilize Slater to the best of its abilities, right? So person we're talking to at the moment, there's loads of people, but yeah, I think it's an important point to make that your thoughts are powerful at this stage of Slater's nascent journey. So we have got through a ton of stuff there. Before we end the stream, what I would love to do is to talk a little bit about features you wish Slater had. We've talked a little bit about this as we've done this stream, but can we just kind of wrap up with a summary of features that you wish Slater had?
Now, I've got a ton, so but as I alluded to earlier, I think a clever implementation of some of the features that VS Code offers. Like I say, syntax highlighting. For me, being able to select a variable in VS Code and then hitting Command D to select multiple instances of that variable is such a time saver, whereas I think at the moment it just deletes the whole line. So yeah, I think there's like Pinegrow is an interesting example of a simplified implementation of VS Code, where you get a lot of those ease of life things without all the buttons and switches. So if that encapsulates a few of these wants and desires, then that would be awesome. I mentioned it in my video, being able to reorder and just play, like, it's good for organization, the tool. So to see certain files or to load certain files in a certain order based on their, dragging and dropping. I'm not sure how easy that would be. Like ESLinting and editor config manipulation. So if I don't want it, if I want erroring or don't want erroring on certain things because I know about it or have control, like giving me options to do it, the ESLinting options and the editor config options, as I said. And this is big from a product standpoint, and I don't know how feasible this is, because I think Webflow have kind of raised their hands of it, but video hosting, because Slater could become the all-in-one solution for external assets that implement into Webflow, and forever there's a conversation around where can I host my videos. Obviously, you've got bandwidth issues, and this is more from a product standpoint and monetary standpoint, and whether it's actually feasible. But it would be cool for Slater to be the all-in-one solution, to say you can upload your videos here, you can do your CSS, and you can do your JavaScript, or just a general asset storage that's a bit more comprehensive than Webflow. But again, there are monetary concerns with that unfortunately the everyday user doesn't think about. Videos take up a lot of bandwidth and they can cost a lot to do. God knows how YouTube are doing it. That's why in Webflow they allow you to link to Vimeo and YouTube, because they just don't want to have to deal with hosting videos on their platform. So I've got a few more, but I think that summarizes everything that I'd like to see.
Got a few more. We'll need another live stream just to go through them, I reckon, and discuss them. But fascinating to hear. Because Slater's exciting from the perspective of it can do a lot. There's a lot of stuff that there's a lot of potential problems or points of friction for more advanced workflows, and there's this kind of an endless to-do list or potential to-do list. It's deciding what to do more than the options that are out there. That I think is the point. That's kind of just trying to work through that. But unless there's any other comments or questions, I feel like we should wrap this up. I've already taken an hour of your time, and I think we both needed coffee. That was awesome. I feel like you are someone that I'm really glad that you've come into the Slater, but you know what you're talking about. It's really interesting to be like, what is Slater now? What could it become? For just speaking up, saying what you think, being part of the community. If you are aspiring to be more like Samuel, which I hope you are if you're still on the stream, then definitely join the Slater Slack. Join the Slater Slack and jump in, ask things. We've got Whit, Jared, Mason, me. I'm doing more of the community-orientated questions, but any technical support that you need, you've essentially got people that are at the top of their game who can help, plus members of the community like Samuel who can also jump in and comment on your code or whatever. So get involved there. If you're wanting to be added, DM me on Twitter at Slater_app or at JackRiddley1. I will send you a DM with that invite. Samuel, is there anything that we need to say before we wrap this up? Is there anything that you want to leave as inspiration for the fans?
Well, we briefly spoke about not. I'll think about the inspiration bit in a sec, but there was something we were. I thought that we could talk about is explaining some of the alternatives, but I think that would make for an interesting video on my channel to say, look, we have all these solutions. What are the pros and cons, and why should we and shouldn't we jump into some of this stuff? So that's probably something I'd ask people who watch this or people who are fans of my channel, but let me know if you want to see more of that. Words of inspiration. I don't really have anything top of mind. Just keep on keeping on, guys. It's a tough world out there, and be nice to each other. That's all I can say.
Be nice, be supportive. Do not be a keyboard warrior. And yes,
yeah,
if you're prepared to say it to their face, then you're allowed to type it. I would argue. But I think that's a completely separate point to this Slater live stream. Either way, we appreciate all the support that you are giving everyone who's in the chat, to Samuel as well. The product is only as good as the user experience that you guys are actually having using it. So, we're really, really proud that you guys are giving feedback, actively using it, and supporting the product roadmap, making sure that it's the most useful tool for you. If it's not useful for you, then there is a big problem. So, keep commenting, keep talking about improvements, etc. Let's wrap it. Samuel, you've been great. Thank you so much. This will be on the tube. This is a live stream, so feel free, if anyone's watching, come back, watch it. I'm going to post this on Twitter and LinkedIn and stuff now. But thank you. Have a great day, Samuel. Have a great day for everyone watching. Cheers, guys. Bosh.
Cool.